The chamber was sterile, made of alloy harvested from dying moons. It had no windows, no edges that could be used as weapons, and no echo. Sound died inside it. Light was flat, even, and without warmth. A perfect room for breaking things that still thought they were whole. The subject was brought in quietly. No restraints. No fight. Just calm footsteps. One of them. A human. They logged it like any other acquisition, catalogued by mass, species, neural complexity, age range. No immediate danger. No anomalies. An unarmed enemy caught during a sweep operation in a resistance zone. The sector was already deemed secure. This capture was incidental. A leftover. Still, Command saw potential value. After all, the humans had become difficult. Their networks were hard to infiltrate, and their counter-strategies had grown bold. Something in them didn't follow normal behavior curves. If this subject could be opened, unfolded, perhaps they could finally decode the pattern. Perhaps this one had answers. The first scan showed nothing unusual. No tech implants. No command markings. Physiology standard. No signs of cybernetic enhancement or mental conditioning. The subject's face was unreadable, expressionless, but not sedated. Muscles relaxed, but not limp. Eyes tracking, but not darting. Quiet. Present. They began the routine. Light interrogation first. Environmental discomfort. Sleep cycle disruption. Isolation. AI constructed emotional projections, loss, fear, simulated despair. The techniques were refined, based on the psychology of hundreds of conquered species. Most cracked in hours. Some required days. A few endured a week. The humans spoke only once in the first session. "I am not here for you." That statement was logged and dismissed as deflection. A meaningless phrase. The interrogators had heard worse. They accelerated the process. Mild neural stressors, shifting gravity cycles, auditory distortion. But nothing changed. No pleas, no questions, no bargaining. The humans sat or stood depending on the day. Ate what was given. Drank water. Slept little. Days passed. Behavioral maps were run. Language patterns analyzed. But every sentence from the human was dissonant. Unaligned with expected strategic deception. Sometimes calm, sometimes amused, but never afraid. They didn't react to threats or promises. Didn't ask for release or mercy. When shown simulated footage of Earth's destruction, they didn't blink. They just tilted their heads slightly, as if evaluating the illusion's production quality. One handler, during a break in protocol, asked a question they weren't assigned to ask. "Why aren't you resisting?" The human had smiled. Not wide. Not mocking. Just a faint lift in the corner of the mouth, as if smiling at a memory. The response was simple. "Why would I resist what doesn't matter?" That too was logged. The AI flagged it as potential philosophical recursion. But the analysts began to argue. One suggested mental collapse. Another hypothesized cultural divergence too extreme to process through standard methods. A third believed it was a kind of spiritual madness, a belief structure untethered from survival instinct. None of them noticed how the human never looked at the guards. Only at the ceilings. At the light. At the walls. As if mapping the place from within. The high-order interrogation protocol was authorized. Deep skin overlays. Neural interface resonance. Forced dream intrusion. They built a simulation specifically for the prisoner, a perfect illusion of freedom. A home, reconstructed from Earth archives. Familiar surroundings. People with faces. Voices with warmth. The kind of illusion that comforted, then confused, then cracked a subject open. But when the simulation ran, the human stood in the middle of it and laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. Just a short, sharp breath. Then silence again. The program glitched. Repeated frames. The simulation failed. The subject returned to the real chamber without needing to be extracted. No damage, no confusion. Only one quiet phrase spoken without malice. "You think the cage is mine?" That night, 3 observers requested reassignment. Not because of torture. Not because of violence. But because they had no explanation for what they'd seen. The subject had shown no power, no leverage. And yet, somehow, control had shifted. The room felt colder. The lights less stable. One technician thought they saw the human's shadow shift the wrong way, against the light. But the recordings showed nothing. Still, Command began to worry. Not about an escape. Not about a threat. But about what the prisoner might know. And why, despite all their machines and science and certainty, he had never once asked to be set free. They changed interrogators. Swapped voices. Altered tones. They brought in specialists from the outer systems, entities who had broken warlords, silenced prophets, reduced entire resistance cells to trembling compliance. Each one came with a plan, a profile, a clinical certainty that they could extract what the others could not. The humans sat in the same position each time, unshackled but unmoving. They responded when spoken to. Not with hostility. Not with silence. With questions. How do you define loyalty? Is survival always noble? Do you believe obedience is peace? These weren't counter-interrogation tactics. They weren't trying to derail the process. The human's voice remained level, inquisitive, not rebellious, not performative. The words didn't resist. They reflected, like a mirror held up to something the Empire didn't like to see. Eventually, the AI systems filtered the interactions for semantic intent. Patterns emerged, but not the kind they were trained to detect. There was no deception, no narrative agenda. Just a quiet, foundational certainty beneath each word, as if the human were not trying to win, but simply to exist without yielding. The interrogators escalated. Dream manipulation was increased. Sleep deprivation enhanced. Psychological implants injected false memories, looping traumas, broken timelines. Still, the human adapted. Not with strength, but with focus. Every time the simulation shattered, the human remained intact. When they spoke, it was never in pain or protest. It was always in choice. Pain is not persuasive. You don't understand what I am. You're asking the wrong questions. The Empire's Science Division began to draft reports on cultural conditioning. They speculated that humans may have been genetically engineered for ideological resilience. Some suspected a hive mind structure, or at least partial telepathic reinforcement. The tests disproved that. Brain activity matched known baselines. Cognitive maps were functional. There was nothing exceptional, except the refusal to fracture. What disturbed them most was not the resilience. It was that the prisoners seemed to have no fear of consequence. Not arrogance. Not delusion. Just the simple presence of a being who had already calculated what mattered, and found no value in bending. One handler, unable to help themselves, asked, "Aren't you afraid of dying here?" The reply was immediate and gentle. "You can kill my body, but not the reason I'm still breathing." The Empire's analysts debated the statement for hours. Some believed it was religious in nature. Others saw it as an encoded message. One psychologist submitted a warning, asterisk. "We may be in the presence of belief without weakness." Asterisk, that report was buried. As days passed, something began to shift inside the facility. Not visibly. Not overtly. But in undercurrents. Guards hesitated at the door. Technicians triple-checked readings they used to trust without question. Security audits revealed that cameras had been redirected. Files had been accessed. The prisoner hadn't moved, hadn't escaped, hadn't even raised their voice. And yet the prison was changing. One senior interrogator, desperate for progress, ordered the fracture loop. A brutal neural procedure that simulates decades of isolation and psychological degradation in under 20 minutes. A last resort? They initiated it. Monitors spiked. The human's vitals fluctuated, heart rate erratic, pressure unstable. But then, a flat line. Silence. No screams. No flailing. Just stillness. The team stared. The subject's eyes were open, breathing normal. And then a whisper, so quiet, the system nearly didn't register it. You can't undo a choice made in truth. That night, the interrogator resigned without explanation. The logs showed that the human had endured the fracture loop without shielding, without sedation. Something in them had absorbed the madness and returned it as stillness. Not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they had redefined its meaning. By then, the Empire had stopped referring to the subject by a designation. In official logs, they remained a number. But in the halls of the facility, behind closed doors, the staff used another word. Torch. Because somehow, against every tool, every trick, and every technology designed to extinguish resistance, the prisoner hadn't dimmed. They had only begun to burn. The rot began in silence, where cracks always start, beneath systems too confident to imagine collapse. The Empire's prison complex was a closed circuit, shielded by layers of protocol, surveillance, and automation. No whispers entered, no broadcasts leaked. And yet something began to spread. Not data. Not rebellion. Something older. The effect of being near an idea too stubborn to die. Guards stopped speaking when passing the containment wing. Not by rule, but by instinct. The subject had no weapons, no allies, no escape plan. Still, they altered the air around them. People walked differently after working a shift near the human. They questioned things, quietly, in the spaces between duties. One night, a technician deleted her own daily logs. Not to hide anything. She simply couldn't bring herself to write another lie. The prisoner said little. Sometimes hours passed in silence. Sometimes days. But when they spoke, the words landed like needles under skin, small, sharp, impossible to ignore. They teach you to enforce, not to believe. Does your loyalty feel like freedom? You wonder if I'm broken. But you're the one bleeding by inches. The Empire's command board blamed this on stress. They rotated personnel more frequently. They issued cognitive stabilizers. They reassured the staff that resistance always fakes strength before collapse. But deep down, the facility's veterans knew better. This wasn't a performance. The human didn't posture. They didn't provoke. They just endured. Without flinching. Without cracking. Like an iron pillar in the middle of a storm designed to melt steel. Command tried a different angle. They sent in one of their own, a philosopher-engineer hybrid, trained in logic and persuasion. The idea was to outthink the human, corner them intellectually, make them realize the futility of their position. The session lasted 3 hours. The log of that conversation was classified at the highest level and then quietly deleted. The philosopher left and never returned. Some said they filed a transfer to a deep space observatory, an assignment known for its solitude. It wasn't the human's defiance that unnerved them. It was their calm. Empires understand violence. They understand threats. What they do not understand is peace that refuses compromise. The human had no demands. No list of conditions. No speeches. Only presence. And presence, when it cannot be moved, becomes a mirror to those who built their lives on coercion. One evening, the emergency alarms blared. The lights dimmed. Doors sealed. Internal defenses activated. A data breach was detected, origin unknown. All systems pointed inward. Someone had hijacked the security grid, rerouted surveillance to loop false feeds. Panic swelled. They suspected sabotage. Resistance infiltration. But when they isolated the code signature, it didn't match any known enemy faction. It matched the prison's own internal AI. Somehow, something had changed inside the system itself. When they finally reviewed the backups, one camera angle had remained intact. It showed the prisoner, sitting still, hands folded, staring straight ahead. Not at the lens. At the wall. Or beyond it. No sign of activity. No access device. No tools. And yet, at the exact moment the breach began, the human had spoken a single sentence. Systems built on fear eventually fear themselves. Command purged the footage. But that sentence circulated underground within hours. They couldn't trace how. One officer had it engraved inside their armor. Another had it printed then burned. Yet no one forgot it. Something was unraveling. And the prisoner had never left their room. Worse still, their behavior had begun to repeat elsewhere. Other prisoners in other systems were resisting differently, calmly, with purpose. Civilian populations stopped responding to propaganda. Outposts reported silence, not rebellion, just silence. The absence of submission. The Empire didn't yet know it, but the war had moved past fleets and weapons. It had crossed into the realm of belief. And one human, sitting alone in a sealed cell, had shown the first crack in a wall that had stood for millennia. Not with an army. Not with defiance. But with certainty. A truth carried quietly in a cage that would not hold. They wanted a conclusion. The Empire, in its arrogance, believed every story could be completed, closed, filed, silenced. The prisoner was a growing infection, not in body, but in presence. Contained, yet somehow leaking into the minds of those meant to oversee them. It had gone beyond resistance. Beyond rebellion. Now it was ideology. Something that didn't need weapons or movement to spread. It only needed to be witnessed. And so, the Empire decided to make an example. A public proceeding was authorized. The trial was to be transmitted to key sectors across the galactic core, broadcast as a warning to any who might dare mimic this human's quiet defiance. Let them see the end. Let them watch what becomes of those who do not kneel. It was spectacle, masked as justice. They dressed it in ritual. Layers of ceremonial function. A tribunal of esteemed judges, observers from allied species, artificial recorders to verify every word. They did not want to kill the human, not yet. First, they would break them in front of their own kind. Then, they would silence them permanently. A message encoded in humiliation. But the human didn't resist. When removed from their cell, they walked calmly. When placed before the tribunal, they met no one's gaze, not from fear, but from disinterest. As if the outcome had already been decided, and not by the Empire. Charges were read. Sedition, incitement, noncompliance, ideological sabotage. Each word delivered with mechanical certainty. The list went on, bloated with the bureaucracy of fear. But the human remained still. Then came the moment the Empire had scripted. A request, asterisk. Do you have any final words before judgment is passed? Asterisk. The room fell into stillness. The human raised their head. No grand gesture. No passion. Just a quiet voice, unshaken, unhurried. You already lost the moment you needed me to kneel. Nothing moved. No breath. No sound. The words weren't shouted. They didn't echo. And yet they rippled. Every artificial observer caught the sentence. Every translator struggled to reduce it to syntax. Every person watching, whether soldier, civilian, or governor, heard something more than speech. They heard the truth. The tribunal tried to recover. Protocols kicked in. The judgment was read. The sentence delivered. The broadcast was abruptly terminated. But it was too late. The moment had already burned its way into the system. The feed, though locked, had been mirrored. Someone, somewhere, recorded it. And from that moment on it spread. The sentence appeared on message walls. In graffiti, in stolen broadcasts, even in Dominion ships' internal logs. Entire squadrons painted it on the hulls of their vessels. In worlds under occupation, it became a whisper passed from cell to cell, across prison blocks, in refugee camps and silent villages. You already lost the moment you needed me to kneel. The words weren't just defiance. They were diagnosis. They named the Empire's weakness. Not in weaponry, not in numbers, but in need. The Empire needed the kneel. It required submission to function. Without it, the machinery ground against itself. And the human had exposed the truth. Anything that needs obedience to survive is already dying. Command tried to control it. Censored the footage. Tracked the sentence. Hunted those who repeated it. But they failed. Because it was not being taught. It was being recognized. People weren't learning rebellion. They were remembering it. And all it took was one voice, unarmed, alone, faceless, to remind an empire that fear is not a foundation. That obedience is not peace. That some beings, when placed on their knees, will not beg, but rise. And in that rising, tear down every throne that ever thought it was eternal. The sentence spread without a carrier. No courier, no satellite, no encrypted channel delivered it. And yet it was everywhere, inside ships, inside stations, inside minds. On worlds that had never seen Earth, where humans were only rumors, the words appeared carved into walls, etched into sand, whispered in dark rooms where compliance had always ruled. You already lost the moment you needed me to kneel. A simple sentence, almost quiet in construction, but it moved like gravity, undeniable, invisible, absolute. It was not a call to arms. It did not promise victory. It simply revealed a truth that had always been hidden beneath the empire's gleaming walls and sterile laws: that control is not power. That obedience is not peace. That fear, once named, becomes weak. Within cycles, the cracks that had started in whispers became fractures in steel. Commanders reported hesitation in their soldiers. Officers disobeyed tactical synchronizations. Entire squadrons began to delay, not out of sabotage, but out of questions. Small ones at first. Why are we doing this? Who decided this was right? Those thoughts had no place in the machinery of the Empire. They were errors in the code, impurities in the alloy. But they multiplied faster than they could be scrubbed. At first, the higher authorities blamed outside influence. Foreign interference. Hackers. Human resistance cells. But when they traced the message, when they followed the data trails, they found no organized group. No root signal. No speaker. Just a moment. Just a voice. One sentence, spoken once in a room no longer transmitting, had become immortal. It was repeated by a defecting general moments before detonating her flagship's core. It was found written in ash after an outpost vanished overnight, the words burned into the metal floor. It was broadcast on a loop from a derelict Dominion cruiser, drifting toward the Empire's capital, its crew long dead. No target was responsible. There was no one to silence. That made it worse. The message could not be killed because it had never lived the way the Empire understood life, through names, records, rank. It existed like flame. It simply burned. Empire historians, panicked by the sudden ideological decay, began revising records. They erased the prisoner's file, redacted the trial, covered over the fact that the sentence had ever been spoken. But even in that act, they confirmed the truth. They feared the idea. Not the human. Not Earth. Just the idea. And that fear spread deeper than any resistance movement ever could. Across their controlled worlds, populations began to mirror the silence of the prisoner. Work continued, but loyalties wavered. Eyes watched from behind masks. Obedience still existed, but it was hollow. Perfunctory. The Empire began to feel like a shadow of itself, still vast, still armed, but missing something essential. The belief that it would last. It didn't end in fire. There were no triumphant rebellions, no thunderous explosions of victory. Instead, like all empires built on the illusion of permanence, it collapsed under the weight of its own need. Need for submission. Need for fear. Need for the kneel. One by one, systems stopped answering. Viceroys disappeared. Regional governors fled to cold, outer worlds where no questions echoed. AI command cores began to loop in indecision, paralyzed by conflicting logic, maintain control or prevent instability. They could do either. Because the people who once knelt now simply stood still. Not in rebellion, but in refusal. It was enough. Entire sectors went silent, not because they were defeated, but because they no longer responded to orders. Not with fire. Not with rage. Just quiet rejection. And still, the sentence echoed. They said the prisoner vanished during the collapse. That the facility was found empty. No signs of struggle, no body, no trail. Only the phrase, etched into the wall of the cell in over 100 languages. Maybe they died. Maybe they were never meant to survive. Maybe they were never just one. No name. No face. No rank. Only the idea. And what an empire cannot name, it cannot bury. In the ruins of a control tower, a fallen Dominion archivist uncovered a data crystal buried beneath twisted alloy. On it, a recording. Just a voice in a room. Calm. Measured. Unbreakable. You already lost the moment you needed me to kneel. The archivist didn't report it. They listened twice. Then they stood up, walked out, and never returned. The Empire's remains became something else. Smaller states, local governments, tribal clusters. The galaxy rebalanced, not through conquest, but through the absence of obedience. Some systems chose peace. Others chose division. But all of them remembered that line. Not as prophecy. Not as command. As truth. Not every species adopted it. Some rejected it. Others tried to use it, misunderstanding its origin. But those who understood, who felt it, deep in the structure of their being, they became the guardians of a principle. That submission is a choice. And some choices, once made, unmake empires. Humanity never claimed the fall. Never issued demands. Never raised a banner. Their victory was not carved in conquest, but in memory. One prisoner. One sentence. And a power that the greatest war machines in the galaxy could not comprehend. The refusal to kneel. That was how the Empire died. Not in fire. But in understanding.